and letting them in. We are now live. Welcome everyone to Literature Lovers Night Out from the comfort of your own homes. Can I get some of the attendees to type into the chat box where you're tuning in from this evening so that we know we have a live audience? At the bottom of your screen, you will see some icons that say participants chat. Oh, we're getting people from all over the country. That's excellent. Wisconsin, Chicago, Texas, Minnesota. Wow, that's great. Arizona. Oh, how wonderful. Thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. Appreciate it. That's great. Okay. I'm Pamela Klinger-Horn and welcome to Literature Lovers Night Out tonight. On behalf of my partner stores, Excelsior Bay Books in beautiful Excelsior, Minnesota, and Valley Bookseller in gorgeous Riverside, Stillwater, Minnesota, I am thrilled to welcome you this evening's program with these four wonderful historical fiction writers. It's my pleasure to introduce you to them this evening. I have read and enjoyed all of their novels, and I am excited to share them with readers in the Minnesota and entire nation this evening. Our speakers tonight are Lauren Fox, who is joining us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Lauren, you want to wave and say hello? Then we have Judithe Little, who is joining us from Houston, Texas. Greer Mcallister is in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and Sarah Penner is in beautiful, warm St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you all for so graciously joining us this evening. We are going to go in alphabetical order this evening, and our first speaker will be Lauren Fox. This is Lauren's second appearance at Literature Lovers Night Out. She last visited the program in its early days when we used the Excelsior Chamber of Commerce. These days, she's making herself known on stages that are slightly larger, such as the Today Show. Just this week, Jenna Bush Hager announced that Lauren's fourth novel, Send for Me, is this month's February book club selection for the Today Show Book Club. Congratulations, Lauren. I could not be more honored to have you at the Literature Lovers program to tell readers about Send for Me. This is Lauren's first work of historical fiction, and it has significant ties to her own family's history. Lauren can share more about her fascinating new novel. Please welcome Lauren Fox to the virtual Literature Lovers Night Out stage. Thank you, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much. I am thrilled and honored to be here. Yeah, thank you. I'll just get right into it. As Pamela said, I'm the author of Send for Me, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book and a little bit about my personal connection to it. And I think I'll just start out by reading a tiny bit from it, just one page to get the feel of the book and to get sort of in the mood for what I'll say next. So this is the first page of the book. It starts with the panic, the sound of sharp knocking, the pounding on Annalise's door, a crash in her skull, jolting her from sleep. They're coming. Her heart slams and she sits up, blind in the darkness. Her arms reach out. Where's the baby? Fear floods her lungs. She's drowning. They're coming. Breathe. Hold the baby close. Keep her quiet. Is there something else in the churning flood of terror? In the squeeze of panic? The slightest slackening? Relief? She's been waiting so long for this moment. Dread, her constant companion, and now it's here. Whatever horror is about to befall her, she won't have to fear it any longer. In the room, silent now, she strains to hear. Her heart is pounding so hard, her body is thrumming, her hands trembling. Is that her husband next to her, snoring softly? Is that the warm, reassuring shape of him? They will take him too. They'll take all of it, everything and everyone she has ever loved, in an instant, a flash. Years will pass, a long, surprising slant of light, and this terror will abate. She will pick her daughter up from school, stand in her kitchen with her hands on her hips, sip from a glass in the evening, slip under smooth sheets. But this will always be her frozen moment, the definition of her days. They will always be pounding on the door in the middle of the night. They will always be coming. Well, Send for Me is about 4 generations of women. It begins in Germany on the cusp of World War II, and it moves forward in time to present-day Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The book is about a Jewish family that is torn apart by the rising anti-Semitism in Germany in the late 1930s. It's about the people who got out of Germany just in time and the ones who were unable to leave. It's about the ways we are connected to one another and how we love each other. It's about mothers and daughters and generational trauma, the way our family's stories are passed down to us, not always overtly, but sometimes as complicated and unspoken undercurrents that we inherit. So the novel tells the story of Anneliese, a young mother who, with her husband and daughter, flees Germany in 1938, but is forced to leave the rest of her family behind. The story jumps ahead to present-day Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Annaliese's granddaughter, Claire, is a young woman trying to pry herself apart from her family's history. She's a little aimless and unsure of herself, deeply connected to her own mother, uncertain of how to live an independent life, weighed down by the heavy burden of loss that in some ways defines her family. It's a really personal story for me, extremely close to my heart. It's based on my own family's story. My mom and grandparents left Germany in 1938, and they left most of their family behind, and they settled in Milwaukee, which is where I was born. I grew up in a really close family, very loving and connected, but with some sense that there were things I couldn't talk about and questions I shouldn't ask. I've written about this, but I remember standing in my grandparents' kitchen, gathering up all of my courage and asking them if they ever wanted to go back to Germany. My grandmother was standing at the stove cooking. She stood with her back to me and didn't answer my question. She didn't say anything. And my grandfather, after a long while, just quietly said, "No, mein Kind." So I knew about German history, and I knew about the history of the Holocaust, of course, and I knew where they came from, but I never really understood what all of that meant for us and my family. I was in my 20s when I stumbled upon the letters. My grandparents had been living with us when I was in high school and college, and they had recently died, and all of their belongings were in the basement of my parents' house. One day I was going through their things and I found a box full of letters. I still really so vividly remember the moment that I found those letters. They were in a little wooden box. There was a pink ribbon that tied the letters together. There are about 75 letters. They were in German, and I couldn't read German, but they were also in a script that very few people can read. It looked to me like knife scratchings on paper. It was an old-fashioned, I found out later, it was an old-fashioned script that was taught at a very specific moment in German history and then not anymore. And I knew that I had found something kind of magical and important. And I had a sense, even before I knew what they said, that they were going to be a key that was going to unlock something for me. I actually have them still. I'm going to just hold up a photocopy of one of them. They're so fragile. This is a copy, but you can get a sense of what they look like. And I'll just hold it up for a minute, and you can see, even if whether you can read German or not, you won't be able to read these. It's just, this is what it looks like. So I was in graduate school at the University of Minnesota at the time. I was studying creative writing, and I found a professor there who took a personal interest in my family's story and was able to help me. Because many of you are in Minnesota, I'll tell you his name. It was Gerhard Weiss. I don't know if that's a familiar name to you all. He died a couple of years ago. He had a personal connection to the story. He was he grew up in Berlin during the war, and his father was Jewish and his mother wasn't. So he was connected to the story that, connected to my family's story, and offered to help me. So every week I would go to his office with 2 or 3 of these letters, and he would read them out loud into a little tape recorder that I brought with me. And I would take them home and transcribe them. It was like hearing my great grandmother's voice. And sometimes I was so immersed in the story that sometimes I almost expected to see a letter in the mailbox from her. She wasn't trying to tell me a story, of course, but in her voice, I heard echoes of my mother and my grandmother, a worry-soaked love. I heard her anguish and her deep desire to be reunited with her loved ones, and her desperation, and her wanting just to be able to hold her granddaughter. The letters were a long and exhausting lament, combined with lots of practical concerns, like, what should we do with the piano? You forgot to bring your red dress. At one point in the letter, she said, if I don't think of everything, this is what happens. And so it was kind of, they were sort of a poignant combination of her incredible desire to see her family again, and like sometimes her annoyance at her daughter for not being as organized as she was. They were kind of a progression of what was happening. It was a sort of domestic progression of what was happening in Germany, the things she wasn't able to do anymore, the fact that they had to sell their house for not very much money. She asks a lot of questions of my grandmother. She sort of just doesn't know what to do. She's just kind of beside herself. She says, like, should I sell the pots? This repeats in the letters a few times. Should I sell the pots and pans? I don't, she says, I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. So as I said, I was in graduate school at the time, and this became my project. I approached the project as a memoir, and initially I tried to weave the letters through with my own memories and observations of growing up. But in the end, it didn't really work because I was in my 20s and I just didn't have enough to say. But I believed then so strongly, and I still do, that we live in a world where there are Holocaust deniers. So we have such a strong and specific obligation to the truth. After I got my MFA, I moved back to Milwaukee with my husband, and I abandoned this project. I was exhausted by it, and I started writing other things. I like to say I wrote some lighter novels about betrayal and infidelity. But of course, this story stayed with me, wouldn't leave me alone. For many years, my husband would sort of occasionally nudge me and say, when are you going to return to that book? And I would say confidently, never. But of course, it was cooking in my brain the whole time, simmering on a low heat. I was finally inspired to go back to it a few years ago when it came to light that families were being separated at the border. And I realized starkly that the past is always with us and that we have the propensity to make the same mistakes. I saw, as we all saw, images of children in cages separated with their parents, and I really understood that this story is still relevant. I figured out then, after some prodding from more than one person who reminded me that I had already written 3 novels, that this story would work better as fiction, which cracked the whole thing open for me. I realized I could stay true to my family's story. I could use my great-grandmother's letters, stay true to her words, but I gave myself permission to fully invent these characters. This is just a tiny example, but my grandmother's family owned a butcher shop, and she met my grandfather because he was a cattle dealer. But I've been a vegetarian my whole life, and I was not going to set this story in a butcher shop. So I decided to set it in a bakery, made a much more pleasant and fun writing experience for me. So I did lots of experience. I did lots of research on the time period, read a lot of history books, and even went to Germany with my family and visited the town where my grandmother was from and where my mother was born. I fully immersed myself in this time and place through my research, and that gave me the confidence to embrace this as historical fiction, which is something I had never done before. I loved doing the historical research, which was surprising to me. I loved it when I had the most specific, granular question, like what kind of shoes would a woman be wearing in 1937? And I could find the answer. I began to understand these characters from the inside and the outside. And in that way, I was able to tell my family's story without limiting myself. I could invent a character, for example, who closely resembled my grandmother, but of course I could never know what my grandmother was actually thinking as she said goodbye to her mother in 1938, or when she was a young girl falling in love for the first time, or when she had her child. I could never know what was in her head, but as a fiction writer, I could give her traits and thoughts and ideas, and that in that way her story came to life. So after a few years of work on this book, I handed in a draft to my editor thinking I was done, but she came back to me and felt like a piece of the story was missing. Ironically, it was the contemporary story, which is the story I had tried to write while I was in grad school. I found myself reluctant to write the contemporary thread, but once I realized that she was right, I reconnected with that piece of the story, the part I felt so close to. And by this point, I had 2 daughters of my own, so I felt like I had a totally different perspective as both a mother and a daughter on the girl who was trying to figure out who she was in relation to her family's history, trying to figure out how to live in the world, not to escape the story her family handed down to her, but to both embrace it and transcend it. So that is the story of Send for me, and my connection to it. As Pamela said, when she was introducing us, I think she said actually, there are a couple of questions that somebody sent, another writer sent in that she wanted to just kind of see if we could answer those questions. So I just wanted to present a couple of them to you. The first question she asked was, what is your writing routine? And that's an easy one for me because I used to have a writing routine, but I think I no longer have one. since COVID, I think everything is upended. And I used to write religiously when my children were at school, but now since they're just upstairs doing homeschool, I just grab whatever hours I can. I'm not precious about it. I don't think that I ever was, but I'm definitely not now. I'm just trying to just squeeze any space and time I can and make that my writing routine. She also asked, how do you find your main character, or does she find you? Which is such an interesting question. I spend a lot of time talking to myself, and I, like every writer, I'm obsessed with certain themes. So I think my process of finding main character is just kind of like sitting with the question for a long time and just figuring out who best embodies those ideas. And that's the fun of creating a main character, is just visualizing the person and kind of listening to what she says until she comes alive. The last question was, what's your favorite writing tip? So I will just share with you that I try to take notes all the time, even when I'm not working on something specific. I try to observe and look up from my phone as much as I can, and just sort of live like a writer in the world, and observe and pay attention. And I remember when Alice Munro announced that she was retiring, and I was so retiring from writing, and I was so kind of stunned by that. Like, what does that mean to retire from writing? And I thought back then a lot about what it means to be a writer in the world, just constantly taking notes and framing the world as a potential story. So my best writing tip is to just see your work as a writer as a discipline, and to constantly be paying attention to the world around you. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for those
Thank you.
fascinating insights into your new novel, Send For Me. Do you want to hold that up for the screen so people can see the beautiful cover?
It's behind my hair, right back there. And
yes.
Here's another copy.
Thank you. And I wanted to say there was a couple of questions while you were chatting. One woman was interested in knowing where exactly you went for your research. I know you mentioned you went to Germany. What cities in particular?
So my grandmother was from a small town near Frankfurt called Langenlonsheim.
Okay, great. And then someone else wanted to know what your mother thought about your novel.
My parents are just, like I've said this before, they would just be so proud of me for, tying my shoes properly. But they're delighted, like they're wonderfully supportive. And I think my mom is really thrilled that this story is out in the world. I think she feels like I have honored this story. I hope she feels that way.
Oh, that's wonderful. I feel honored that I was able to read an early copy. It's just so beautiful. And I'm so thrilled for you to be a Jenna Bush Book Club selection.
Me too.
So we have one advantage over the Today Show, however, is that both Excelsior Bay Books and Valley Bookseller have signed copies of Send For Me. There's book plates at both stores, and I did put links to purchase the book into the chat box. I accidentally put it in 4 or 5 times there. So you can just click on that link and it'll take you directly to either the Excelsior Bay website or the Valley Bookseller website, and you can add that book to your cart as you keep shopping this evening with all of our authors. And don't forget, Valentine's Day is coming up, and this would also make an excellent Mother's Day gift. Signed books are so extra special to receive. And please order, shop ahead, get one for yourself, get one for friends, but just make sure you get one. Lauren, thank you again so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next author this evening is Judithe Little. We'll let Judithe pop in here. There she is. Welcome, Judithe.
Thank you.
There you are. I'm going to switch over now, got you on this big screen. And I wanted to tell everybody that Judithe's new novel, you want to hold it up? The Chanel Sisters. Gorgeous, gorgeous. The perfume Coco from Chanel came out when I was in college, and I have been a devoted Coco wearer ever since. The name Chanel has long been synonymous with style. And Gabrielle Chanel's own story, however, it's not well known. Judithe Little brings the lives of Gabrielle, also known as Coco, and her sister Antoinette to life. in her addictive new novel, The Chanel Sisters. This is Judith's second novel, and it's well-researched and richly detailed exploration of the origins of the myths and magic surrounding the stylish sisters. Please join me in welcoming Judithe Little tonight to our virtual stage as she presents The Chanel Sisters. Thank you, Judithe.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Excelsior Bay Books and Valley Bookseller, for carrying the book. I really appreciate it and inviting me to be here. The Chanel Sisters is the story of Coco Chanel's early life as told by her sister Antoinette. It starts in 1897 and the novel ends in 1921, just as Coco has become famous and rich. I thought I would start by telling you all 3 things that you may not have known about Coco and that were the inspiration for me to want to tell this story about this part of her life. And so the first one is, if you are like me, you may have assumed that Coco was born in Paris to a wealthy family and lived a life of glamour and sophistication and was born with a strand of pearls around her neck. And the exact opposite is actually the truth. She was born in a poorhouse to an unwed mother. Her father wasn't there. He was a traveling peddler. He sold used things from town to town, and he was a swindler, and he pretty much swindled Coco's mother into having 5 children. And he eventually was forced to marry her by her family, but he was never around. And he ended up, she would chase him down, trying to find him, and she ended up dying when she was in her early 30s of poverty, exhaustion, illness. And Coco was 11, and her younger sister Antoinette, who's the narrator, was 7. Coco's father came and took the 2 brothers to be hired farm laborers at a farm. And the sisters he dropped at a convent orphanage in the middle of France, and they never saw him again for the rest of their lives. And so Coco, her life changed, abruptly at this convent orphanage where she was raised as a charity case. She went from a very chaotic beginning without a home to call her own or a place that they stayed in for any length of time, to having regular meals and to having clothes and structure and routine. And she was also taught how to sew at the time, which of course she said, I'm never going to sew. I don't want to be a seamstress. I hate sewing. The interesting thing about her too is that she lied about her past. She never admitted that she was raised in a convent orphanage, and she took that secret with her to her death. She would never bring it up, never mention it, and claimed to have been raised by aunts in the countryside. And the reason I think that she denied that was because if she admitted that she was raised in a convent orphanage, she would have to admit that her father had abandoned her. And that for her was really the defining event of her life, and was what made her, a lot of the decisions she made in her life all kind of stemmed from that having happened to her. But the interesting thing is that she denied her convent past, but she left clues of her convent past in everything that she did. In her design aesthetic, she favored, the black and white of the sort of nuns' uniforms. She liked the rough, nubby fabrics that were very similar to peasant fabrics. She made chain link belts that were almost exact copies of the rosary belts that the nuns wore around their waists. And even her logo, the interlocking C's, you can find that in the stained glass of the convent orphanage where she grew up. Another aspect of her sort of clue to her peasant past and her sort of nun-like sensibility is that she was really good at making something out of nothing. And during World War I, the fabrics were very hard to come by, and she came upon jersey that there was a stash of jersey, and it was available, but it had only been used until that time as fabric for men's underclothes. So she bought up all this jersey and she made suits and dresses for women and sold them to the creme de la creme of Paris society and had them all paying exorbitant amounts to walk around in what had been the fabric of men's underwear. Another thing she did was during World War I in DeVille, which is where she opened her second store. The war had started and the society women there wanted to volunteer at the hospital. And so they showed up in all of their fancy clothes. And the doctor said, no, you cannot work here with that. You're a hazard. You can't move around and you have to wear something else. So they found, or the doctor found, some old nurses' uniforms in a cabinet and pulled them out and said, you have to wear these. And of course, the ladies were saying, we are not going to wear those. And they took them to Coco, who was making a name for herself at the time. She still was not famous. They took them to Coco and she redid them and turned them into elegant outfits that the ladies would then wear. So that was sort of her thing. She converged at a time with World War I, and her style, it was the perfect storm because she made clothes that women could move in. And that was a time when women needed to move. They weren't decorative anymore. They needed to interact more with the world. Another thing, the second thing that you may not have known that I didn't know was that she had a sister, Antoinette, and that Antoinette played a really big role in the founding of the Chanel empire, an unsung role. Nobody has really heard of her today, but she was there with Coco. And one reason she's the narrator is because she knows the truth about Coco's background. She's not going to lie about it. And she knows that Coco lied about it because of how much the abandonment by their father hurt her. And she was there when Coco opened a hat shop. For the first time, Antoinette was by her side. Antoinette was the vendeuse. She greeted the customers while Coco was in the back making the hats, and Antoinette helped Coco when she opened her second boutique in DeVille, and then she was with her for the third boutique in Biarritz, which was the biggest boutique that Coco had. It was her most successful, and Antoinette actually ran that boutique by herself with over 100 employees. And together they were very modern women. They were entrepreneurs, which is unusual at the time. They were trailblazers. And part of it, too, I think, is from the convent. Again, at the convent, they unwillingly were observing a women-run business for all those years with the Mother Abbess as basically the CEO of the operation. And then the third thing is that her real name was not Coco, but it was Gabrielle. And she came upon the nickname of Coco a little bit later in life. But she told people that Coco was a nickname that her father gave to her, a term of endearment, which again was part of her disguising the truth about her father and what had really happened with him. So she got the name Coco because after she left the care of the nuns, she had nothing. She had no money. She had no prospects. She only had her ability to sew, which of course was very boring for her. And she decided that she wanted to be a star of the stage. And at that time for women, it was a man's world, and it was difficult for women of their social level, which was basically the lowest of the low, to pull themselves up and take care of themselves. There were two ways that women did that at the time. And one was they became the mistress of a wealthy man, and they collected pearls and the jewels as sort of their 401k plan for later on. And they could also become stars of the stage. And so that was what Coco went for. And she started singing in a cabaret in Moulin, France, where there were a bunch of soldiers. And she had her signature song was called Coco at the Trocadero, which was a song about a little lost dog. And so she would get up on stage and all the soldiers would pound on the tables and shout, Coco, Coco, Coco. And that became her nickname. And but she never told that was not a happy time in her life. So again, she never told anybody about her time in Mulan. And later she went on to Vichy, which was a resort town where she also tried to become a star of the stage there, and it didn't work out for her. And she came upon selling hats later on in life. She was actually a late bloomer, which I think a lot of people, I know I probably just assumed that she had always wanted to be a fashion designer, and that's what she became. But she actually came upon it by accident because she made hats for herself, and other women would see them and she would make them for her friends. And same with her clothes. She would wear certain clothes and other people would see them and ask her where she got them. And the rest is sort of history. So the Chanel sisters, you know, it's a fictional account of her life. And it's, I guess the one thing I hope that people will remember is that the interlocking seas, you know, we all look at that and we think luxury and expense and all the Parisian glamour. And I hope that people, when they see it now, will see a girl from a convent who managed to pull herself up out of poverty all by herself. And it's a success story. The questions about writing, I am with Lauren. I have no system. I'm very unorganized. I think part of it is that if I had certain hours that I work on my book, then it would kind of feel like work. And I still want this to be fun. I don't want it to be work. The inspiration was Antoinette. I had read a biography of Coco Chanel. And as soon as I heard that she had a sister, I was just fascinated by the idea of what it would have been like to be Coco Chanel's sister. And so I started researching that, and that's how the story came about. And lastly, my advice for writers is to, I think one of the hardest things is that you just have to write and force yourself to sit down and put words on the page, even though when they first come out, they're usually pretty ugly. So, whoop, and that is my phone. Okay, and that's all I have for now.
Thank you so much, Judith. Most of the questions that came up while you were talking, you answered. Two that people might be wondering about. One woman in the Q&A box was wondering if the girls ever went back to visit the convent as adults.
I don't know if Antoinette did. Coco supposedly did. People in the town say they saw a big black car pull up outside of it, and she supposedly supported them by donating money to them. So she did go secretly, and she supposedly she had them destroy the records too, the records of her time there.
Interesting. And then one other question, someone is wondering if Coco Chanel had sympathies towards the Nazis.
She had a Nazi boyfriend, so yes, during World War II. The novel ends in 1921, and my research pretty much ended in 1921, so I'm not an expert on that area. But at that time in her life, she was almost 60 years old, and she was in Paris during the occupation, and she had a Nazi boyfriend. So the answer to that is yes.
Okay. And then someone was asking about ancestors of Coco or Antoinette, and I don't know if you want them to read the book to find that out, or if you feel comfortable sharing that information.
I think that's a good idea. There's an author's note at the back of the book that explains everything that is fictional and everything that is not fictional, and kind of what happened to who and when.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Judith. I think you now have all of us lusting after a trip to Paris when it's once again safe to travel. Judith also sent signed book plates to both Excelsior Bay Books and Valley Bookseller. There is a link in the chat box to both of those sites. You can just click on it and add the book to your shopping cart, because I know you'll want to get a book from each author this evening. They're so fantastic. And don't forget, Valentine's Day is coming up, or if you exchange gifts with your lady friends, it makes an excellent Galentine's Day gift for all your stylish friends. Don't you think so, Judith?
Definitely.
Oh, definitely. Well, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time and having you join us tonight all the way from Texas.
Thank you. It was fun.
So, our next speaker is Greer Mcallister. There she is. Hi, Greer.
Hello.
Let's see. Okay, I'm just doing a little change up here on the screen. Okay. Here we go. Okay, some of you may have been fortunate enough to meet Greer in real life when she visited the Literature Lovers Luncheon out at Hazeltine National Golf Club a few years ago. She was a sold-out sensation when she visited then. She had 2 books at the time. Her first one, The Magician's Lie, and Girl in Disguise. Yes, she's pointing up there. Do you want to actually hold them up closer to the camera so we can all see them better?
I'm afraid if I take them down,
Okay, gotcha.
some sort of accordion effect, but
Right. We
yeah,
don't want that.
those are them, and I will hold up
Perfect.
an
Perfect.
extra copy of Arctic Fury.
Great. Since then, Greer has been very busy. She published Woman 99, which is a fascinating novel set in a woman's asylum. So you know that's going to be good because it has to be with the word asylum in it. And I'm hoping that she's going to give us a little teaser about the exciting news about some screen version that's come up. And tonight, however, her main focus is going to be her newest novel, The Arctic Fury. This is available in paperback and perfect for book clubs. This novel is about a group of intrepid women who go on an Arctic exploration to save a lost crew of men, and then the high stakes court drama that ensues afterwards. So Greer has a lot of excitement to share with us this evening. Please take it away, Greer Mcallister.
Thank you so much, Pamela. It's so great. I can see panelists' names. There's so many familiar names and unfamiliar names, and I know I was lucky enough to meet some of you when I was in the Twin Cities area last time. So it remains a wonderful memory. And then when we're able to travel again in person, like Pamela said, I'm really looking forward to being back in Minnesota again. So so this is the Arctic Fury. It's set in 1853 and 1854, and it was inspired by the Lost Franklin expedition. So my story is about an all-female group of explorers who is sent in search of the Lost Franklin expedition, and 13 women who go north, and what happens when not all of them come back. So there's a murder trial. I got to write a murder trial, which is really exciting. Those of you who have read The Magician's Lie know that this is not the first book that I've written about a woman who may or may not have committed murder. But this one actually goes even farther. The Magician's Lie went back and forth between 2 time frames, and the Arctic Fury, I don't know what I was thinking, but it's 2.5 time frames and 13 points of view. So when I said to my editor, hey, I want to write this book about the Arctic, and also, by the way, I really want it to have 13 points of view. Bless her, she did not laugh in my face. She just said, if you're going to do that, what you need to do is make sure that there's something that each woman knows or sees or shares that Virginia, who is the main character, wouldn't know or tell us. And so I'm able to sort of draw from these different experiences and sort of pull all these women together. So I'll talk a little bit about how I put together that female supergroup in a minute, but first I want to talk about the Franklin expedition itself, because that was the inspiration for the book, and it's what led me in this direction north. Because historical fiction, I haven't read a lot of historical fiction set in the Arctic, and so it was the unusual setting that pulled me into it. And the Lost Franklin expedition that inspired it, I first learned about from a Margaret Atwood short story that I read in graduate school. And at that time, the Franklin expedition was lost in the 1840s, and they searched and searched and searched. Over 100 men, 2, warships, full-size ships, but they had sailed into the Arctic, and at that time, the Arctic was not mapped, not known. That's why they were sending explorers that way. But they didn't find those ships until 2014 and 2016. That's how thoroughly lost those ships were. But Lady Jane Franklin, who was the wife of the expedition's leader, Sir John Franklin, sent wave after wave of expeditions. She sponsored them. Sometimes she paid for them. Sometimes she went and publicly spoke to get other people to sign on and pay for them. But she was really, really, for a number of reasons, invested in having her husband either found or proving that he had discovered the Northwest Passage, which is what they were all after. So I read about that story. I read another fabulous book called The Voyage of the Narwhal by Andrea Barrett, which follows a fictional American who goes north in search of the Franklin expedition. And that book has some interesting female characters, but they're very much relegated to the sidelines. They're realistic women of the 1840s and 1850s, and what we tend to think of as typical Victorian women, that their role is to nurture and to shape the family, and to be the light of the hearth and the home. And there were certainly plenty of women doing that, but the deeper I got into my research in the 1840s and 1850s, the more I found women who were doing amazing, bold, fabulous things in that period. And remember, this was sort of the westward expansion phase, where there were women traveling the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, leaving their entire lives behind on the East Coast to build something new with their family on the other side of the continent in this complete unknown. So there were women doing that. There were women who were serving as battlefield nurses in the Mexican-American War. There were women who were married to trappers. There were all sorts of interesting women, botanical illustrators who would go to South America just to draw like the flowers that the explorers found there. And really I wanted to write about all of these women, but of course they're all very different stories. So I sort of assembled a female supergroup of women who were inspired by real women of the time. And in my author's note at the end of the book, you'll see which women in the traveling party were inspired by specific women from history, so that you can follow that thread and see, okay, who was Sarah Bowman, who was who is the lady mountaineer who inspired Caprice, and that sort of thing. So you can, it is very much a what if story. It is very much, historical fiction with a little history and a lot of fiction, which is how where I like to play. So that's why it's sort of going off in that direction. And that way I get to sort of compose a satisfying story, because I find that when you stick to real history and what's in the historical record, real life is sometimes very unsatisfying. And I wanted my story to have a clear narrative and to be rewarding. In the way that I, as a reader, love to be whisked away and also surprised. I wanted to whisk away my readers and then also surprise them. So there are some secrets revealed and some revelations and some shocks and whatnot along the way. So that's, like I said, it's the type of story I want to see as a reader. It's very much an action adventure take on historical fiction, because it is all of these women going up into the wilds in this completely uncharted territory, and all they've got is each other. Which sort of gets rid of a lot of the divisions and what society wants of them, but it also sort of brings some cracks to the surface. So so I'm excited to share it with you all. I do want to talk about one of the women in the book who is a real figure from history, and that's Lady Jane Franklin, who I mentioned earlier, because she also did some amazing things. And so when I got into the research, also finding out that she had, while her husband was off doing his, being assigned to his posts, she was sailing up the Nile and riding a donkey into Nazareth and hanging out in Malta and meeting Bedouins and all sorts of things that you would not think of a woman of the 1840s as doing. And as I found that, I thought, oh, okay, well, if there had been an all-female expedition to the Arctic, she totally would have done it. She would have gotten behind that, because she believed that women were truly capable of way more than society would allow them to do. And so in my book, she sort of sets out to prove that, and is the benefactor who sets up Virginia and most of the rest of the party to go north and in search of her husband for a big monetary reward, which is true. That is, she did offer a reward for the return of her husband. And also, I incorporated some things from her real life into it. For example, letters. She had sent letters with some of the expeditions that she sent north, and that's something that she does in my book as well. So I wanted to show just quickly, this book, I had to deviate from my usual process. The Magician's Lie took me 5 years because I had no idea how to write historical fiction. And so anytime I needed a fact, I would stop writing and go find it. And it turns out that's not the best way for me to work, because if I stop writing, that's bad. So now my preferred method is to do a ton of research, write a draft of the book, and then do a ton more research. But I was under such a tight time frame with this one, and there was so much research that I kind of got into a pinch, and I had to research and write at the same time. So I don't recommend it. I don't love it. I think it paid off. But I would have books like Sir John Franklin's Erebus and Terror Expedition, the Erebus and the Terror were the ships, and a few post-it notes about things that I might want to include in the book. So that was sort of the gathering process, and as I'm sure my fellow authors would say, and there are tons of authors in the audience too. It's great to see so many of you here. Research, historical fiction, it's not a competition to see who can jam in the most facts, right? You need to have the facts, but you need to also know when to hold them back and how many of them to use, because if you want the story to be the main focus, too many details can detract from that. So it was really a question of, okay, I've got all these details. Now, how do I space them out and drop them and share them in order to make it a satisfying story, like I was saying earlier? But the best thing and the worst thing was that there was so much detail that I could pick from, because the people who were going north, it was their job to write things down and to say it was August 18th and I stood on this hill and this is what I saw. So I was reading a lot of that stuff and getting super, super into, and it was just fun to read all of that detail. So we did have a couple of questions that were asked about the writing process. My writing process is an absolute mess. So I write a sloppy first draft and then go back and fix it. And like my fellow authors have said, my life is not structured right now for me to be able to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. or even from 9 to 9:30 at this point. So my process is to write whenever I can. And if I can't sit down and write, to think about the writing, to have the characters on my mind. When I'm in an active drafting mode, I really need to just be cogitating and having it all churning up there. And my writing tip before I close and hand it off, and I've read Sarah's book and it's so awesome. I feel really lucky to have gotten an advance copy, so I'm not going to take any of Sarah's time. But my writing tip is a two-parter. Don't give up, because I really think that persistence is what separates the authors who almost get published or do get published and stop after one book. Persistence is really what separates the people who want to make it and the people who do get to a higher level. So don't give up and don't go it alone. I mean, author friends are some of my favorite people in the entire world, and having their support and having that network as I do this is just absolutely valuable. And one more thing, because I know Pamela asked about it, and anybody who's read Woman 99, I want to share this information with. Woman 99 has been optioned for TV by Made Up Stories, which is Bruna Papandreou's company. She was one of the producers of Big Little Lies. And Nina Dobrev is attached to star in it. So if we have any Vampire Diaries fans out there, it has been announced as her next project. And her followers on Instagram are very excited about that. One of my most exciting social media experiences was the day that Nina Dobrev's fans found out about Woman 99. And it was really exciting. So I'm going to hand it back to Pamela to hand off to Sarah.
Thank you for that, Greer. I have a question for you. Now, the edition behind you that has more of a beige photo for Woman 99, is that one of the foreign editions?
Yeah, that's the Canadian version. So
Beautiful.
this the American version, and this was the one book of mine that the hardcover and the paperback were actually the same cover. And then this was the Canadian cover of Woman 99. So a lot of times my Canadian fans just buy the American edition, but this version was HarperCollins Canada bought the rights to it. So I get to have both.
Very interesting. And someone wanted to know how long it took you to write The Arctic Fury.
It was about 2 years from beginning to end, but there was a lot of space in there where I wasn't working on it. So the important thing was I got the value of having it on my mind for 2 years so that when I sat down to write it, and I really, like I said, I was sort of under a tight timeline to finish it. So that draft, I was working much longer days than I was used to in the last few months of that 2 years to get it to all come out.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. Greer also graciously sent book plates to Valley Bookseller and Excelsior Bay Books. They're there waiting. When you purchase any of Greer's novels, you will receive one of those precious plates. All four of her novels are in book club friendly paperback editions, just right for you to stock up for yourself or for gift giving. Remember, Valentine's Day is coming up, and a 4-pack of Greer Mcallister novels is a lot healthier than 4 pounds of chocolate, right? And it's just as delicious. So thank you so much, Greer. We're thrilled to have you back at the Literature Lovers program, and we appreciate you sharing your time with us this evening.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Our final speaker this evening is first-time novelist Sarah Penner. And I'm so...
Hi, Pamela.
Hello, Sarah. Thank you for joining us. I have worked with Sarah's team at Park Row Books quite a few times. They emailed me about her novel, The Lost Apothecary, and said, Pamela, have we got a book for you? And they were right. I absolutely tore through this novel, and I think all of you are going to as well. This book does not come out until March 2nd, so you're going to get a little bit of early news about it. The Lost Apothecary is an addictive and smart debut about a female apothecary who secretly dispenses poisons to help women with men who have done them wrong. There are 2 rules. Rule 1, the poison must never be used to harm another woman. And rule 2, the names of the murderer and her victim must be recorded in the apothecary register. Jump to the present when another woman goes mudlarking, which I'm sure Sarah will explain, in the Thames in London, and the 2 stories collide. The Lost Apothecary, as I said, arrives March 2nd. We're fortunate to have Sarah with us tonight to give us some early information about the book. If you're as intrigued as I was about The Lost Apothecary, you can pre-order it after her chat, and I will put the links in the box, and both Valley Bookseller and Excelsior Bay will have signed book plates. You can add that book to your shopping cart and it'll be shipped out to you, or you can pick it up on March 2nd. In the meantime, let's all welcome Sarah Penner.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I'm so excited to be here, and it's an interesting feeling going last in a discussion like this when the 3 authors who've come before me, I said earlier, I was just kind of fangirling over them myself, and how I am even being invited to the discussion, I don't know. So I want to just say thank you so much to you for having me, and for everyone who's tuning in. I think it's wonderful that there's such a great audience. I'm in Florida and it's almost 9 o'clock, and I know a bunch of you are on the East Coast. So thank you so much for curling up in your PJs on your couch, and hopefully this will be an interesting few minutes for me to talk through my story and inspiration, and then give you a little bit of insight into me personally. So Pamela did a great job sort of giving you an overview of my book, but as she mentioned, it comes out March 2nd, which is officially less than 1 month. So we sold this book in, I think, November 2019. So I have been waiting very anxiously for this period of time. And it feels like every day I just wake up and I can't believe we're almost there. And I've been so thrilled with the early reception of the story. So The story is about a female apothecary in 18th century London, and she sells well-disguised poisons to women clientele who are seeking vengeance on the men who have wronged them. And 200 years later, in present day London, a woman goes mudlarking on the River Thames. And for those of you who don't know what mudlarking is, I'm going to talk through it and tell you about my own experience mudlarking. So this woman finds a small, mysterious apothecary vial in the River Thames, and she soon suspects that she has found the culprit in the never solved apothecary murders that haunted London 200 years earlier. So really the story, the book is kind of following these two women, and their stories collide at the end in several twists, and really interesting things happen at the end that of course I'm not going to spoil. And there's actually a third character that I haven't mentioned. She's in a historical narrative, and her name is Eliza, and she's a very precocious 12-year-old girl. And very early in the story, she goes to the apothecary's shop and she purchases a poison, and you get to find out what she does with it and what happens after she walks out of the hidden shop with this poison in her pocket. So Pamela already mentioned the two rules that the apothecary has. She stole my thunder a little bit there, but it's all right, Pamela, I understand. But I'll just repeat them again real briefly.
Sorry, Sarah.
That's okay, no problem. The poison cannot be used against a woman. And also the apothecary's second rule is that the names of the customer and her victim must be recorded in the apothecary's register. So if you think of opening up this register, all of those secrets are laid bare. Every customer she's ever had, the poison she dispensed to them, who their victim was, the date that they were in the shop, all of that really important information is in her register. So naturally, as any good story would progress, that register is possibly maybe found, and what happens. So that's another question that is answered in the story. This book is ideal for readers who like witchy vibes with poisons and potions. There's even a few recipes at the back of the book, some poisonous and some not. Also ideal for readers who like magical realism, maps and old antiquated ephemera, mysteries, and old London and dark alleyways. I was inspired to write this story after kind of settling on the idea of a sinister apothecary who sold not remedies, but something more harmful. So that led me down the path of poison. And a lot of readers have asked if the book is about, or if it's a retelling of a woman who lived in 17th century Italy named Giulia Tofana, and she had a poison dubbed Aqua Tofana. The answer is no. This book is not a retelling. It wasn't even inspired by her. And I'm embarrassed to admit I did not learn about her in my research for this book. I actually learned about her after the book was, copy edited and all of that. So, but it's interesting. There are a lot of parallels because they're both women poisoners. I also went with the 18th century because it was a perfect era for a fictional poisoner, because modern toxicology and forensic autopsies really did not exist until the mid 19th century, the 1850s. So for someone to have worked as an apothecary and a poisoner in the late 1700s, her poisons would not have been detected during an autopsy. So it was a perfect era to set this story. And then personally, I just love Georgian London. It's very scandalous. There were all sorts of brothels and the gin craze, and King George III was kind of crazy. And so there's just so much good scandal to incorporate into a book set in Georgian London. I mentioned earlier that I went mudlarking. This is how the present day character in the story really kicks off her journey. And I brought a couple of things, or I have on my desk a couple of things that I found while mudlarking. This is a piece of an old clay pipe. I know it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but this is probably 18th century from some research and professionals on Instagram who do, they're much more advanced mudlarkers than me. They helped me date it based on some ridges. So that's the pipe. And then lots of little pottery pieces. So this one has some blue in it. Actually, a lot of the dyes that were used in the 17th and 18th centuries were blue. So I have a lot of blue and white pottery that I found. But there are all sorts of cool things. If anyone ever goes mudlarking in London, you can find Roman coins and old figurines and sometimes really valuable things that need to be reported to museums. So I highly recommend that when lockdowns are over to go mudlarking. I also did a fair bit of research at the British Library. I looked through old apothecary logs, many of which were hard to read, but it was still kind of gives you that sensory detail and to have the book in front of you. I did endless research on herbs and poisons. My bookshelves are full of research material on poisons, and none of which I've really incorporated into my own life, of course, but it's been fascinating to research. I was thrilled that The Lost Apothecary sold overnight to Park Row Books and is going to be available and translated in more than 15 territories worldwide. So what I've learned is a lot of international territories love this concept of healers and medical history. So it's been very well received internationally. So I'm thrilled about all of those translations. And I know we're running out of time, but a little bit about myself. I mentioned I live in Florida. I'm in St. Petersburg, and I live with my husband and our 6-year-old dog. Her name is Zoe. And if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see all sorts of pictures of Zoe. I work in finance full time. So the way that I get writing done is I'm an early bird. I wake up about 5 most mornings and I write from 5:15 to 8:15 or so. So that's a solid few hours that are very quiet, dark. No one's emailing me, no one's texting me, and I can get a lot of writing done. And I also feel very creatively alert during that time after a cup of coffee or two. So that works really well for me. 9 o'clock, which it is now, is about my bedtime. So I don't work well at night. I'm not nearly as creative at night. And probably as soon as we hang up here, I'll be going and putting on my PJs. The question about a writing tip for anyone who's on the call that is interested in writing or is an aspiring author, I had to think kind of hard about this because there are so many things I could say about persistence and positivity, but the one thing that I would really suggest is to be open to feedback. And early on, this may be from your writing friends, your critique readers, your beta readers, but even as you continue in your career, and I'm learning this now more than ever, you still have to be open to feedback from your agent and your editorial team, and you have to have it with a good attitude. And remember that they are trying to help you and that they have the same end goalpost as you, and that is to have a successful story on the market. So the word revision, if you split that into two pieces, it's re-envision. And I like that second piece about vision, because what you're trying to do is see what could this story be. Maybe your vision's over here and you're going to get a lot of feedback that's going to help bring you closer to that perfect vision that's going to make the story the best it can possibly be. So in a nutshell, be open to feedback, take revision to heart, and then listen to your gut and go with the feedback that you feel is right and stay true to the story that you kind of initially created.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Someone just wanted to clarify that mudlarking really is digging in the mud.
So the origin of the word, that's kind of where you get the mudlarking, but really you can kind of just walk the foreshore or the riverbed. It's mainly stones and rocks and pebbles. You're actually not allowed on the River Thames to dig in the mud. That's against the law unless you have a special permit, but you can like lift up rocks. And a lot of times the interesting artifacts and objects get kind of lodged between stones. But mostly you're like on the bank of the river. You're not actually in the mud.
Great, thank you. And is that a sign and a finished copy of The Lost Apothecary on your shelf?
Yes, they just came in 2 days ago. This is what they look like. And they have this, the gold embossing is like beautiful and reflective. And it's just like the most beautiful book I've ever seen. Obviously I'm biased, but the art team did a phenomenal job.
They did. That is a really beautiful addition. What a lovely gift item. Sarah also sent book plates to the stores. So when the book comes out on March 2nd, if you would like to either come into the store and pick up a copy or have it sent to you, it will include a book plate at either Excelsior Bay Books or Valley Bookseller. I put the link into the chat box, and all information about all of these books and upcoming programs can always be found at the Lit Lovers website, which is lit-lovers.com. So you can just copy and paste that and take care of your shopping after we all chat. Sarah, I again want to thank you for coming and sharing your remarkable story with us. Congratulations on your first, but I'm sure not last novel. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more from you. This was just a spectacular read. So.
Thank you, Pamela, for having me.
Yes, and I think that it comes out in March, like I said, so people can buy this one for all of their extensive St. Patrick's Day gift giving. So that will be an excellent gift. If I could get all 4 of the authors to come back on screen now. There's my Brady Bunch. Thank you, everyone. So I appreciate you all being here tonight. I'm getting rid of a couple extras here. There we go. And I want to thank all of you for taking your time to join us, the Literature Lovers program. Everybody is welcome to order any or all of these novels from Excelsior Bay Books, Valley Bookseller, and get your signed book plates. Again, the novels are Lauren Fox with Send For Me. Thank you so much, Lauren. Greer Mcallister with The Arctic Fury. Judithe Little, The Chanel Sisters, and Sarah Penner with The Lost Apothecary. Thank you all so much. And thank you to the audience for tuning in this evening. I hope that you will join us again when we return on February 18th, when the Literature Lover program hosts Kristen Hanna, the New York Times bestselling author, and her new work of historical fiction, The Four Winds. When they announced on Monday that Lauren's book, Send For Me, was a Today Show pick, they also announced that her second pick was The Four Winds. And so we are thrilled to be having Kristen Hanna. And again, we have signed copies that they do not have at the Today Show. So the first 100 registrants at Excelsior Bay Books will receive a signed first edition, and the first 100 registrants at Valley Bookseller will receive a signed first edition. And there are still room at both stores to get a signed first edition when you purchase your ticket that includes a book. Full details, as I said, are at the website, lit-lovers.com. You can get all the information and links there for both Valley Bookseller and Excelsior Bay Books. So thank you once again to our featured authors tonight, Lauren Fox, Judithe Little, Greer Mcallister, and Sarah Penner. Big round of virtual applause to all of you, and congratulations on these wonderful novels. I enjoyed every single one of them, and I know that the audience will too. Thank you to all of us, to all the audience who joined us this evening, and from all of us at Excelsior Bay Books and Valley Bookseller, I wish you a good evening, good health, and happy reading to all. Good night. Thanks for joining us.